Hey everyone, thanks for stopping by. So obviously, with a title and thumbnail like this one, it's bound to get a fairly strong reaction. And I'd be lying if I said this was motivated by purely honorable intentions. In this video, I'm going to be making a case for why I believe that Tony Morris from the governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses is a closet homosexual. And when I say that, I'm not saying I think he necessarily acts on it privately, although who knows, nothing would surprise me. I'm saying that I think he is likely at minimum a latent homosexual, which will be explained shortly. Generally, I'm speaking on more positive matters such as the law of attraction, but today, I just couldn't help myself. Before we get into that, however, of course you can appreciate that it'll have to be prefaced by a series of disclaimers. The first one being, everything said herein is to be understood as TMZ-style gossip. The evidence I present is purely circumstantial and speculative. It's fan fiction, and believe me, I do consider myself a fan of old Anton III. Now, as speculative as it is, I wouldn't say this gossip is completely baseless. I mean, it still has more grounding than, the doctrine of 1914, for instance. The second is, I convey no offense to those who are presently Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm very serious about this. I actually spend a good deal of my time on this channel defending well-meaning and loving people who identify with this group. I know many, many wonderful Jehovah's Witnesses who deserve more respect than they often get from the public. The third is, nowhere in this video do I direct any hostility or judgment towards the LGBTQ+ community. And that includes the subject himself, should my little whisperings be true. In fact, if anything, it's my message to the governing body that they should do likewise. Get out of the judging business, for heaven's sakes, and do your job as self-appointed spiritual leaders. My fourth disclaimer is, being that Tony Morris is a very well-recognized man with a tremendous amount of power, I feel no obligation to spare him from this scrutiny. The governing body expects unflinching loyalty from their underlings, and it's my opinion that they spread a deeply hurtful message which targets the historically vulnerable and marginalized group of the LGBTQ. I don't feel what I'm doing qualifies as any kind of harassment, but well-earned criticism. My point in this is that the governing body is a group of fallible men who ought not to be seen with such worship. I wish to spread a more democratic view towards these ones, hopefully spurring like-minded ones to be a little more cautious in their devotion to them. So with all that said, I'd like to talk about a particular kind of psychology I've noticed, peculiarly among your conservative and very frequently religious public figures. There is this concerted effort I've observed to compensate for a variety of strictly non-heterosexual inclinations. And they do this through a paradoxical hostility and phobia directed at all untraditional sexual and gender-related orientations generally, but homosexuality in particular. Having been keenly aware of this for the better part of a decade, I'd say, even while I was a member of the Jehovah's Witnesses, I nonetheless never really researched it, not until recently. Turns out, it's a thing. It's been studied before. And while the research has been inconclusive, there have been some fascinating discoveries along the way. And so the whole tight pants scandal involving Tony Morris, which I'll get into shortly and you're likely already aware of, has been swirling around in my mind, and I just felt I had to comment on it. I'm going to tell you why I think there's actually something to this, and why there is more than just a little evidence to support it, despite it being inconclusive. And I'm going to start with a personal story. I used to chum around this one family in the Jehovah's Witness religion. They were a very close-knit family, and all adults ranging in age from about, I'd say, 27 to 39 years old. It was a family of all boys, so they would have been raised with only one woman in the house, the mother. Most of them were fairly short, deeply competitive, and a couple of them, especially the eldest one, profoundly insecure. Anyway, it always intrigued me why the eldest, the middle, and the youngest were so homophobic. I used to spend a lot of time with the youngest, in fact. And he only knew 3 categories of people. Whenever he would gossip about anyone, they were either weird, stupid, or gay. Anyway, periodically I'd used to get together with all the brothers for cards and drinks. And it was always those 3, the eldest, the middle, and the youngest sibling, who at any opportunity would say someone or another was so gay, and they would actually get angry about it. I'd say it dominated at least 35% of all their conversations. Now, I totally understand that some people don't exactly take to that lifestyle. Disgust is an understandable reaction to the behavior itself. As a straight person, you don't have to understand it to be an accepting and loving person. But it always puzzled me, These guys, so far as anyone knew, were not affected by homosexuality externally. That is, they didn't have uncles or cousins who were gay. They were witnesses, so definitely no friends that were either. I'd frequently ask myself, why all the anger, disgust, hate, and condemnation? If there was some legitimate harassment, or perhaps worse, you could understand how a phobia might develop. But why such unprovoked and disproportionate hostility? I never understood it. As I'll explain shortly, I think this aggression stems from a wholesale repression and self-loathing towards certain involuntary temptations or attractions harbored within, which have not been addressed. No matter how hard I try, I just can't seem to find another credible explanation for such unprovoked rage. You've probably met people like this yourself. They're very common, and it's always puzzled me. Then, of course, we're also no stranger to the almost routine media expose of numerous religious or conservative figures famed for their anti-gay rhetoric, who, as it turns out, lead quite, we could say, fabulous personal lives. Who can forget the Mormon David Matheson, one of the most iconic gay conversion therapists in the US, who in January of this year came out as gay. For over a decade, Matheson devoted his life to the ex-gay movement and even co-penned a paper in 2006 comparing homosexuality to mental illness. Or do you remember the Republican senator from North Carolina, Steve Wiles, another gay campaigner, who supported his state's same-sex marriage ban? Turns out he worked as an openly gay drag queen and drag show MC at Club Odyssey. He was also a promoter for the 2011 Miss Gay America pageant. Recall too the Georgian pastor and televangelist Eddie Long, who promised that his Baptist church could deliver people from homosexuality, only to be exposed as a prolific pederast that exploited barely legal young men for sexual favors. Or shall I revive that not-so-distant memory of the George Rakers Rentboy.com scandal? As I said, this has almost become a cliche. I've mentioned only 4 examples thus far. Here's another 4. Randy Boning, Troy King, Richard Curtis, Philip Hinkle. Here's 4 more. Ed Schrock, Larry Craig, Bruce Barkley, and Glenn Murphy Jr. Not satisfied? Mark Foley, Robert Allen, Roy Ashburn, and Ted Haggard. That's not nearly all of them, by the way. And these are fairly high-profile examples. But think too of how the Vatican is reported to be literally swarming with gay priests. The Church of Rome has perhaps historically been the most outspoken opponent of non-traditional sexuality, whose clergy is expected to be celibate. But if anything, it's become a refuge for the thing it condemns. It's such a weird phenomenon, isn't it? As a side note, I'm not dissing the Catholics here. They deserve their due for making certain contributions to our society. I'm merely pointing out a trend here. Now, let's get back to our buddy Anthony Morris III. I love that name, by the way. Before I start to criticize him, I should just say I'm actually really growing to like this guy. He's turned out to be a lot of fun on the internet. Have you ever met someone who is almost impossible to caricature because they're already so cartoonish in the first place? This is what I think of Toni Morris. It's like how Tina Fey's SNL impression of Sarah Palin almost dignifies the subject in question. Toni Morris is hard to top. It's like, how am I supposed to satirize something that is already maximally satiric? So I know this tight pants thing is hardly new. It's become the gift that keeps on giving, actually. But just listen to the virtue signaling and the affected disgust in his rhetoric. After speaking on immodest Spanx for women's exercise wear, he said this in a talk once. And the other thing that needs addressing is for these young fellas, because the older ones aren't doing much of it, thankfully. It's the metrosexual look. We've addressed that in the past. We've said things about it. But what's happening now, and it's really caught on more, metrosexual, that's the tight suit jacket and tight pants, better known as tight pants. And they are tight, I mean tight, all the way down to the ankles. That is not modest, brothers. No, it's not appropriate. It's not sound of mind. And I was proud of this one circuit overseer who told me this past summer at one of the international conventions, because he brought it up. Sure he did. One of these fellas shows up for his circuit overseer visit, and he wants to go out in the ministry, work with him door to door. And he's wearing tight pants. And the circuit overseer was man enough, spiritually man enough to say, no, I'm not going door to door with you, not with that dress on. Inappropriate. And you elders out there listening in, be kind now. We always want to imitate Jesus Christ. You be spiritually man enough to those fellas. You don't go out in the ministry looking like that. Not in this organization. Did you catch the alpha male bravado there? See how he connects this caustic and bullying behavior as masculine, strong, and exemplary? I was also fascinated that he evoked the kindness and meekness of Jesus to assert his point, of all the Bible characters. He would have been better off exemplifying the Apostle Paul or something. Paradoxical indeed, alluding to Jesus here. That's like conjuring Mr. Rogers or Bob Ross to extol the virtues of pessimism, for crying out loud. Further on this example of Christ, I'd be interested to see if Toni Morris could even summon just one instance from the gospel where Jesus explicitly condemned homosexuality, let alone how anyone dressed. Oh sure, there's certain scriptures like Matthew 19 verse 4 to 6 or Matthew 15 verse 19 and 20 that you could make some vague connection to. But give me just one scripture where Jesus forthrightly condemned homosexuality. Toni Morris simply can't. Why? Because it doesn't exist. So to appeal to Christ in this case is bloody comical in my mind. He continues by saying, and frankly, I've asked sister after sister, what do you think of this? Do you find that appealing? Attractive? I'm just curious. Sure you are. Because I'm not a woman. And you know what? I've not met one yet that thought they look good. But like I've been telling others, and this is a fact, the homosexuals that are designing these clothes, they like you in tight pants. That's who likes it, not spiritual people. Kind of sounds to me like somebody else enjoys this style too, and is not happy about the fact that he likes it. It's odd to me that he would choose to fight this urge, not by tearing out the right eye that is stumbling him, as Matthew 5:29 would say, but in fact directing about 4 million men how to dress and groom themselves. Because that doesn't send out the vibe one little bit, does it? Now in Toni's defense, he's definitely correct about this trend catching on. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not particularly crazy about the look either. I think a well-tailored suit should drape over the body slightly conforming to the wearer's build. It shouldn't look as though it were painted on. I've been tremendously disappointed, for example, with how tight virtually the entire wardrobe at Le Chateau and Tip Top is. But I gotta tell you, it never occurred to me that there would be this cabal of renegade costumiers hell-bent on the constriction of your inseam. That never occurred to me. He's also said things like this regarding tight pants during public addresses. Oh yeah, you chuckle. I don't think it's funny. I think it's disgusting. I would never disrespect my Heavenly Father and dress like that. Don't you detect the contempt here? Do you sense the disproportionate and unprovoked aggression? Do you see the attempt to unperson this community? As I showed earlier, we've seen this kind of thing before. Now, I don't know if Tony is gay, and no, I don't believe that just because someone disagrees with homosexuality, that this alone makes them bigots. I don't think that at all. In fact, that in itself can be a reverse form of prejudice. Now, David Pakman is hardly the picture of journalistic credibility here, but I do agree with him on this point. He said, "It's incredible to me that Anthony Morris III thinks about men in tight pants so often. It would seem to me that this is just not a high priority for most people." Anyway, I'm not able to get into the science behind this claim today because, as I opened this video, I said that the psychological research has been largely inconclusive. But simply Google the term latent homosexuality, and there are some very interesting discoveries that have been made. You know, Christopher Hitchens once connected this kind of religious perversion as being both the result and the cause of severe sexual repression. He also quoted Shakespeare, speaking of the policeman who lashes the whore, has hot need to use her for the very offense for which he plies the lash. He might have been right in this case, you know? Hitchens went too far, in my opinion, blaming all religion for such self-loathing and intolerance. I think it has more to do with human psychology in general. Man has been so terrified of his sexual impulses. Historically, sex has been viewed as such a bestial thing, connecting us far too uncomfortably with the dirt and the muck of physical existence. And so our species has tried so very hard to repress it and sweep it under the rug. And as Carl Jung put it, that which you resist persists. And so such sexual repression often exhibits itself in the most unexpected ways, such as the Republican against homosexuality being gay himself, or the priest addicted to porn, or the rise of unwanted pregnancy following the criminalization of abortion, or the adulterer who finds thrill in cheating, or, and this is a big one, the disfellowshipped one for sexual matters, believing he deserved it, and that the discipline was fruitful and really an expression of God's love. It's like, yeah, right, hit me again, Ike. It's an odd state of affairs I wish we had more data on. But I really believe there's something to this. So my point today, most importantly, is to be the first one to call it, should something surface in the media that old Tony III was caught in some male strip bar at 11 a.m. on Sunday, or connected some Grindr profile picture to him, or something of that nature. My other goal here is simply to encourage a little more of a critical eye toward public figures of this variety. All 8 members of the governing body are fallible human beings. Be very cautious about pinning your entire identity, self-worth, or even salvation, should you believe in such a thing, on these ones. They are not gods. They are not implicitly superior, and they are every bit as flawed as anyone else. Now finally, in case someone accuses me of picking on Tony Morris, just because he's kind of become the Mick of the ex-Jehovah's Witness community here, I assure you, I have similar feelings and suspicions towards others like this. Those ones include, because who can it hurt, Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, Ted Cruz, Mitch McConnell, and definitely Marco Rubio in my opinion. I'm just waiting for the headlines, people. If it happens, remember who called it first. Anyway, this was just a fun video. Let me know below in the comments if you think I'm onto something here. I'm not claiming to have smoking gun evidence. It's just a hunch. Don't forget to like and subscribe. This is Derek London. Until next time. Hey guys, did you like this video? You know what to do. And if something I mentioned today resonated with you, click one of them cards on this screen. I have lots of related content sure to interest you. Thanks as always for your views, and we'll see you next time.